Good morning and welcome to another presentation video about an experiment. Again, our experiment for today is going to be about identifying starch with iodine solution and identifying whether there is or not starch in different types of foods. Of course, when we say different types of foods, we mean food groups, as in cheeses, meats, bread. Do they contain starch or don't they? And we are going to go through the material first. I have already started to prepare the solutions for starch so we can distinguish different intensities with different concentrations of starch. Intensities of color, because as you well know, iodine has a special reaction with starch. Well, it's not actually a reaction, but it's an identification. There is a color change. We will find out what color that is. And also, we will move on from that to preparing samples of each of those foods: bread, beef, and maybe some vegetables, to see whether there is starch in those or not. So join us in the following. First of all, we're going to start with the material we're going to use. We're going to use 2 racks for test tubes. This is one rack, and this is the other with the tubes in it. We're going to use distilled water and starch reagent. I'm going to add them to these tubes. As you will see, I have already started with adding 3 milliliters of distilled water to each of the tubes. I am going to continue by adding the starch reagent. And so, this is the starch reagent solution. I'm going to open it and use a plastic pipette, a 3 milliliter pipette, as you will see. And those are 3 milliliters. I'm going to use, of course, drops. I'm not going to use milliliters at all. And after opening the stopper, I can now use the pipette and draw a little bit of starch reagent. There you go. Okay, I think you can see it. And now we move to the test tube. Next is how to prepare solutions using these types of foods: cheese for protein, bread. We can use, instead of cheese, we can use meat, because it's the same thing. It's a protein. And we do have meat, green leaves, and potatoes. Potatoes are the same as bread. So we have 5 items, and we're going to prepare them same as we prepared the solutions in test tubes, samples, and our solutions, so we can take out samples and test for the presence of starch. Now, this is what we call a mortar and crucible. I'm going to crush the food here, and I'm going to add some of it to each test tube that I have. And I'm supposed to have 5, so I'm going to add it to each test tube, and then I'm going to add 3 milliliters of water, distilled water, to the tubes, and then we're going to do the test, or perform the test. So with the spatula, I'm going to take a piece of the meat that we have here. Not too big of a piece, because I don't want to make a mess. Just enough for my experiment. So this is the piece I'm using. Okay? And of course, we put it down in the crucible. And we crush it. Now, sometimes we add some water to make some sort of a solution, but of course it's the mess we're trying to avoid, so we're not going to. As you can see, the meat is now minced. I can remove it with the spatula. And then add it to a test tube. Or add some of it to a test tube. This is a good enough sample. Okay? And of course, I'm going to take it and put it in the rack with, of course, 3 milliliters of distilled water. This is the solution that is supposed to show us whether there is starch in the meat or not. And this is the green leaf, mortared, of course. Now I'm going to add it to the test tube. Okay, so there it is, and into the test tube. Please keep your station clean as much as possible. Try to clean it up every time you use or you feel like the need is there, because you need to always keep it clear and clean so you can continue working efficiently and without let's say without the possibility of mixing up things, okay, and of course getting wrong results. So this is the test tube with the leaf ground, and now I'm going to label the tubes. So as we said before, after grinding the food and sometimes adding water to it, distilled water all the time, and adding those into tubes, test tubes, and labeling them, I have prepared 2 racks of about 9 test tubes. 4 of them or 5 of them contain starch solutions. One of them doesn't contain any starch, which is supposed to be the control. You're supposed to find out which one it is according to the color change. And I have on the other side, I have test tubes, also 5, for each of the different foods I've shown you, and I have grinded and prepared solutions from. And so here's how it looks like. So here are the racks. Of course, as you can see, I have the first rack right here. That is tube marked A, B, C, D, and E. These are the starch solutions. As you can see, the color of all of them is colorless. There is no color. When we add iodine water, that will change, and that would tell us whether there is starch or not. Now on the other rack, I see iodine water. I'm going to use this one to perform the test to see whether I have starch or not. I have cheddar cheese solution. I have the boiled potato solution, as you can see. There it is. Put it back where it was. And then after that, I have the green leaf could be lettuce, could be any other green leaf that you may choose to work with. So there you go. We ground it. We prepared the solution. You can see there's some solid parts still in the solution when I shake it like that. So I'm going to leave it to rest, and then I'm going to perform the experiment to check whether there is starch in a green leaf or not. This is a solution of meat. Again, when I shake the solution, you see the parts of the meat inside still solid, but we're going to leave it to rest, and then we're going to perform the experiment. Of course, we add just a few drops of iodine solution or iodine water, and then we get the result. If there is a change of color, then there must be starch. And bread, last but not least, bread. This is a solution of a piece of bread. I ground it. I ground the piece of bread, and I have added water to it, and this is a solution made from it. And so we are going to now perform the experiment. First, on the first rack, the starch solution. Remember, we used the starch reagent to prepare those solutions. Okay, so starting with tube number or letter A, I'm going to use a little bit with the pipette, with a plastic pipette. I'm going to take a little bit of iodine water, and I am going to add a drop or two to tube A. Please focus on the change of color if it occurs. Apparently there is no change of color. If there's no change of color, that means there's no starch. Test tube A is the control tube because it has no starch. Now in test tube B, what do we have? Have you seen this? Look closely, and the color has changed. Tube C, clearly the color changes instantly. Tube D, the color is even more intense, and tube E, the color is definitely a lot more intense. So what can I deduce from this? I look at tube A. Tube A does not contain starch at all. Zero starch. The color is still transparent or a little bit yellowish. When we put it against a white background, it looks a little bit yellowish, not transparent as water. Tube B. There is a little starch in it, and you can see how the color of the water has changed just a little bit. We can add more iodine water to make sure, and yes, there it is, just a little bit of change. This would be a very light purple. That's tube B. Tube B here. Very light purple. There it is. Next to it is the color purple, which is C. We shake it a bit, and then we add a little bit more of iodine water. See? The color is definitely purple, a light purple. And then we move to D. We move to D. We add a little bit more iodine water, and we see even more change of color. This color is a darker shade of purple. And the last one seems a lot more than just purple. It tends to be navy blue. And so, the color that is most intense is the one with tube E. And so you can see the range of color is 0 starch, a little bit of starch, and actually I have put 1 drop of starch in B, and I have put 4 drops of starch in C. That's even an intense color or more intense. And then it is more intense in D because I put 6 drops, and 10 drops for tube E makes the color the most intense. I'm going to move this rack to the side, and then we're going to move back to the foods that we have. Now we're going to test those if they actually contain starch or not. And of course, we're going to use the same iodine water. There it is. And I'm going to add drops to all of them. Now, please notice that these solutions are not clear. If we want clear solutions, we can obtain them by filtering these exact same solutions. We get only the part that is soluble in water for cheddar cheese, for boiled potatoes, green leaf, and beef and bread. And so, of course, this is not the case now, but we're going to try our experiment nonetheless. And here goes. We're with cheddar cheese. Is there any change of color? Can you see up close if there is any change of color? Nothing. Apparently, cheddar cheese does not contain starch. And moving to boiled potato, please notice well what happens when the drop touches. See? This definitely contains starch. The moment the iodine water touches the potato, the color has changed. See? You can still see the change of color. Now moving to the next one, green leaf. Does green leaf or leaves contain starch? Do they? Has the color changed? Have you seen any change in color? Any change in color? I believe we have seen slight change, just a little bit. Not enough, not just like the potato. But please take a look at the very top of the tube. You see the blue ring? The blue ring on the top? The more I add iodine water, the more I'm going to see that blue ring turn into a darker color. It didn't exist before. Again, notice the blue ring. There you go. So contains a little bit of starch. And now we're going to test the meat or beef, whether it contains starch or not. I'm adding the iodine water. Apparently there is no starch. The color of the iodine water is mixing with the color of the meat, and it's still yellowish. It hasn't changed into any dark color, any purple or any blue. And then finally with bread, as you can see, the purple color is instantly shown. And if I add more drops, more of the color becomes more intense. It becomes a very dark blue. And that says that bread contains starch. Again, starting with iodine water, this is how it looks like. In cheddar cheese, we did not see any change of color. In potato, the color, this is the color of iodine. This is the color that you see. See, there's a big difference. And then in the In the green leaf, we have very slight change of color, if any, if any change. At the very bottom, there is a slight bluish color. So green leaf contains just a little bit of starch. And then we continue to see the beef that contains no starch at all. See? No blue color. And then the very dark color, blue color, that we have for bread. This is a change of color that is definite and we have seen. So that concludes our experiment. So finally, after the experiment, of course, you have noticed that the green leaf does not contain starch, as for our experiment. But in reality, green leaves are the factories on plants where starch is being made. So we have to have starch, and a lot of it, in a green leaf. Why did we have no starch in our experiment? The test tube, the leaf that we used to prepare the solution for green leaf, why did it not test positive for starch? That's a question. Feel free to answer if you want. And of course, the next time we're going to have an experiment is going to be to see whether the green leaf or green leaves in general, do they contain starch or not? Thank you for listening and see you on the next video.